The fluorescent lights in Mount Sinai Memorial's ER flickered twice before Dr. Lena Kovac even looked up from her tablet. She'd been charting the same pneumonia case for 6 minutes, her coffee gone cold in a styrofoam cup that smelled faintly of burnt plastic from sitting too close to the warming station. The charge nurse, Rita Oakes, was mid-sentence about staffing ratios when the first flicker happened. The second flicker made Rita stop talking. "Grid's touchy tonight," Rita muttered, glancing at the ceiling panels. "Con Ed's been doing work on 68th Street all week." Lena nodded but didn't respond. She'd worked night shift at Mount Sinai Memorial for 3 months now, ever since her transfer from Boston General. 3 months of proving herself in a teaching hospital where the attendings had decades of tenure and the residents treated her like a substitute teacher. She was competent, methodical, and perpetually 2 steps behind the unwritten rules that govern this place. Tonight felt different, though. The air conditioning had been cycling oddly since 2200 hours, the vents pushing warm air instead of cold, and now the lights. She set down her tablet and walked to the main desk where the ER operations binder sat, collecting dust beneath a stack of outdated cafeteria menus. The binder was forest green, 3 inches thick, with emergency protocols "do not remove" stamped across the spine in faded gold lettering. Lena had read it cover to cover her first week. Most staff hadn't touched it in years. "What are you doing?" Dr. Marcus Chen, the senior attending, appeared beside her holding a protein bar. He had the easy confidence of someone who'd run this ER for 8 years and could intubate in his sleep. "Checking the generator protocol," Lena said, flipping to the tabbed section marked "Power Failure," code black. Marcus actually laughed, a short bark of amusement that made 2 residents at the nearby computer turn and grin. "Kovac, the backup generators are automatic. They've got a 30-second failover. We're a level 1 trauma center in Manhattan, not some county hospital in Nebraska. SOP says we should identify the incident commander and establish communication with—" "The SOP was written in 1987, Marcus interrupted, his tone kind but dismissive. "Before we had digital systems. Before we renovated the whole electrical infrastructure. Those generators are state-of-the-art. They kicked in during Hurricane Sandy without a hiccup." Lena felt heat creep up her neck. The residents were definitely listening now, pretending to type while watching this interaction like it was primetime television. She wanted to close the binder, laugh it off, prove she could be flexible. Instead, she heard herself say, "Then it won't hurt to review the protocol." Rita cleared her throat diplomatically. "Lena's right to be cautious, but Marcus is also right. Those generators are solid. We've got 42 patients in beds right now, including 3 vented ICU transfers waiting for upstairs beds and a level red trauma coming in from a motorcycle versus garbage truck on the FDR. Let's stay focused on that." The lights flickered a 3rd time, longer this time. The computer monitors dimmed and the persistent hum of the ventilation system dropped half an octave before recovering. In the sudden near silence, Lena heard her own heartbeat and the distant wail of an ambulance siren cutting through Manhattan traffic. Marcus's expression shifted slightly. Not worried exactly, but attentive. He pulled his radio from his belt. "Maintenance. This is ER attending Chen. We're getting power fluctuations down here. What's your status?" Static answered him. Then a voice, crackling and distant. "We're aware. Con Ed's reporting a substation issue on the east side. Should be resolved shortly. Generators are armed and ready if needed." "Copy that." Marcus clipped the radio back and gave Lena a measured look. "See? Under control. But hey, if it makes you feel better, keep that binder handy." It wasn't quite mockery, but it wasn't validation either. Lena nodded and returned to her tablet, the binder now sitting conspicuously open on the desk beside her like a student's hall pass. She could feel the residents' eyes on her, could practically hear them filing this away as another Kovac moment to discuss over post-shift breakfast. The trauma bay doors burst open at 22:47 hours. Paramedics wheeled in the motorcycle victim. A man in his 30s, helmet cracked like an eggshell, his leather jacket shredded on the left side where he'd met asphalt at 40 miles per hour. The familiar choreography began instantly. Rita calling out assignments, respiratory therapy positioning the crash cart, a second-year resident already gloved and reaching for the trauma shears. Triage level red, GCS 7, multiple probable fractures, significant road rash with debris embedded. The lead paramedic's handoff was crisp and practiced. Lena joined the scrum, her hands moving through the practiced motions of a primary survey, while Marcus directed from the head of the bed. The room smelled like blood and gasoline and the chemical tang of the sanitizer they used on the floors. Someone's shoe squeaked against linoleum. The patient's breathing was labored, wet-sounding. "Get me a chest X-ray portable and type in cross for 6 units, Marcus ordered. "Possible hemothorax, and I want trauma surgery down here now, not in 10 minutes. The lights went out. Not flickered. Went out. Complete darkness for exactly 3 seconds that felt like 3 minutes. Then emergency battery lighting kicked in, dim yellow runners along the baseboards, enough to see shapes but not details. The ventilators switched to battery backup with audible beeps. The monitors stayed dark. Generators should be... Someone started. They waited. 5 seconds. 10. 15. The generators didn't come on. In the weak yellow glow, Lena saw Marcus's face change as he understood what she'd understood 20 minutes ago. They were about to find out exactly how well-prepared Mount Sinai Memorial really was. The trauma bay existed now in a twilight zone of battery-powered shadows. Lena's eyes adjusted slowly to the dim baseboards, casting everything in sickly amber, making blood look black and faces look ghostly. The motorcycle victim's chest rose and fell in stuttering rhythms, while the portable ventilator beeped its battery warning, a sound that would repeat every 60 seconds like a countdown timer nobody wanted to hear. "Talk to me, maintenance." Marcus had his radio pressed so hard against his ear that his knuckles went white. "Why aren't the generators engaging?" More static. Then a different voice, older, with the clipped frustration of someone dealing with a problem they didn't understand. "We're on it, Dr. Chen. The automatic transfer switch isn't responding. We're attempting manual override now. Give us 5 minutes." 5 minutes. Lena did the math automatically, a habit from her residency at Mass General where they'd drilled worst-case scenarios until everyone could recite backup timelines in their sleep. The battery lighting would last 4 hours. The ventilators? Maybe 90 minutes depending on settings. The medication refrigerators? 20 minutes before temperatures started climbing into dangerous territory. The digital medication dispensing system? Already offline. The electronic health records? Inaccessible. The automatic doors to the ambulance bay? Frozen in whatever position they'd been in when power died. "Someone want to tell me what our oxygen situation is?" Rita's voice cut through the murmuring chaos with the authority of someone who'd worked 3 hospitals and 2 hurricanes. She'd grabbed a flashlight from somewhere and was sweeping it across the patient's monitor, reading vitals from the last cached numbers on the screen. A respiratory therapist called back. "Wall oxygen is still flowing. That's on a separate system, mechanical pressure. But if we lose the central monitors, we're doing vitals manually on everyone. Then we start doing vitals manually." Rita was already moving, her flashlight beam tracking across the ER's main floor, where 42 patients lay in various states of need. "I want nurses at every bedside. Grab the paper charts from the supply closet. Yes, we still have them. Log everything by hand. Time, vitals, interventions. Like it's 1985. Lena moved toward the supply closet, grateful for clear instructions. But Marcus's voice stopped her. "Kovac, you're in trauma 1. I need you on this patient while I figure out what the hell is happening with our power." She turned back to the motorcycle victim. In the weak light, she could see his chest wall moving asymmetrically, the left side barely rising while the right side heaved with effort. Probable tension pneumothorax. Her hands found his neck, feeling for tracheal deviation, while her mind catalogued what she'd need. Chest tube tray, local anesthetic, sterile gloves, and enough light to see what she was doing. "Someone get me a headlamp," she said, and the thoracotomy kit from the supply cabinet. A resident materialized with both, his hands shaking slightly as he set the sterile tray on the bedside table. The headlamp's LED beam was harsh and white, creating dramatic shadows that would make this procedure even harder, but it was better than the alternative. "You done this without ultrasound?" the resident asked, his voice pitched higher than usual. "Twice. Once in a parking lot." Lena snapped on gloves, the powder smell mixing with the gasoline odor still clinging to the patient's shredded jacket. "You're going to hold the light steady and hand me instruments when I ask. Don't anticipate, don't help, just do exactly what I say." She could feel Marcus watching from across the room even as he spoke into his radio, coordinating with someone upstairs. The pressure of his attention felt like a physical weight. 3 months of being the cautious one, the by-the-book one, the one who checked the SOP binder while everyone else relied on institutional memory. Now she was about to decompress a chest in near darkness with a patient whose name she didn't know, and a resident whose competence was a complete unknown. The patient's oxygen saturation was dropping, 88%, 85. The ventilator's alarm joined the battery warning in a discordant duet. Lena positioned her gloved fingers between the 4th and 5th ribs, feeling for the landmarks she'd memorized in anatomy lab a decade ago. The skin was cool, slightly tacky with drying blood. She could hear her own breathing, loud in her ears. Scalpel. The blade felt familiar in her hand despite the awkward angle and the jumping shadows from the headlamp. She made the incision, clean, decisive, exactly as deep as it needed to be. Dark blood welled immediately. Behind her, someone's radio crackled with another update from maintenance. Still working on the manual override. Main breakers not responding to standard protocol. Not responding to standard protocol. The phrase hung in the air like smoke. Lena's hands continued their work, muscle memory taking over as she dissected down through tissue layers. But her mind was already racing ahead to the question nobody was asking yet. What if this wasn't just a power failure? She inserted the chest tube and was rewarded with a rush of air and blood, the tension releasing, the patient's oxygen saturation immediately beginning to climb. 87, 90, 93. The resident exhaled audibly beside her. Good work, Kovac. Marcus appeared at her shoulder, his face half-shadowed in the ambient gloom. Now secure that tube and then I need you at the main desk. We're implementing Code Black protocol. The one from the binder? She couldn't keep the edge from her voice. Marcus met her eyes. In the darkness, she couldn't read his expression fully, but his tone had shifted from dismissive to something harder. Yeah, that one. Turns out you might have been onto something. The ER's ambient noise had changed in the last 10 minutes. The usual electronic symphony of monitors and ventilators and IV pumps had been replaced by human sounds. Voices calling out vitals, footsteps running between bedsides, the rustle of paper charts being pulled from storage. And underneath it all, a new sound that made Lena's stomach tighten. Sirens. Multiple sirens getting closer, the distinctive wail of ambulances converging on Mount Sinai Memorial, like the hospital was broadcasting a signal only emergency vehicles could hear. Rita appeared beside Marcus, her face grim in the flashlight glow. EMS dispatch is reporting a mass casualty incident at Grand Central. Structural collapse, unknown cause. They're sending us at least 20 incoming. We don't have power, Marcus said flatly. We can barely manage the patients we have. I told them that. They said every other hospital in the grid is in the same situation, and we're the closest level 1. Rita's jaw tightened. First ambulance is 3 minutes out. Lena looked down at the binder still open on the desk. Its pages yellowed, but its protocols suddenly terrifyingly relevant. Page 47, subsection C, mass casualty event during Code Black, disaster triage criteria. The generators still hadn't engaged, and now they were about to get 20 more critical patients into a hospital running on battery backup and prayers. The ambulance bay doors were stuck half open, frozen in position when the power died, creating a gap just wide enough for a stretcher to pass through sideways. Lena stood in that gap now, feeling the November wind cut through her scrubs as she watched the first ambulance navigate around a delivery truck that had stalled mid-turn when the traffic lights went dark. The whole city block was a patchwork of darkness and emergency lighting. Storefront security systems glowing weakly, car headlights sweeping across buildings, and somewhere in the distance, the orange flicker of what might have been a fire. Behind her, the ER had transformed into something from a different era. Nurses moved between beds with clipboards and pen lights, calling out blood pressures and heart rates like auctioneers. Someone had found the old triage tags in a storage room, actual physical tags, color-coded red and yellow and green, that hadn't been used since the hospital switched to digital tracking in 2019. The smell of hand sanitizer mixed with the acrid tang of the battery backup system working overtime, a chemical odor that caught in the back of Lena's throat. Dr. Kovac, a voice behind her. She turned to find Dr. Angela Reeves, the hospital administrator on call, flanked by 2 security guards holding industrial flashlights. Reeves was 60-something, with steel gray hair pulled back so tightly it looked painful, and the kind of posture that suggested military background. I need you to run triage intake. Dr. Chen is establishing incident command upstairs. Understood. Lena had read the incident command protocols in the binder. The hierarchy, the communication chain, the decision-making flowcharts. She'd never expected to use them. What's our patient capacity? We're already at 108%. With incoming, we'll hit 130, maybe 140. Reeves's face was carved from stone in the harsh flashlight glow. Triage hard, doctor. Red tags get the trauma bays. Yellow tags go to the hallway. Green tags wait or get redirected to urgent care facilities with independent power. And if they're all red tags, Reeves held her gaze for 3 seconds. Then you make choices. That's what triage means. The first ambulance backed into the bay, its reverse alarm piercing the night. Paramedics jumped out before it fully stopped, already shouting their handoff. 52-year-old male, crush injury to lower extremities, trapped under concrete for approximately 40 minutes, BP 70/40, and dropping 2 large-bore IVs running wide open. Lena grabbed a red tag from the stack Rita had thrust into her hands and moved forward. The man on the stretcher was gray-faced, his legs wrapped in improvised tourniquets made from what looked like leather belts. She could smell the dusty concrete embedded in his clothes, could see the tremor in his hands as shock set in. Her fingers found his carotid pulse. Thready, rapid, barely there. Trauma Bay 2, she ordered, slapping the red tag onto his chest. Get him on O negative and page trauma surgery stat. The second ambulance was already pulling in, then a third, then two more stacking up behind them, their sirens creating a wall of sound that made communication nearly impossible. Lena moved between stretchers in the weak beam of someone's flashlight, her hands assessing injuries her eyes could barely see. Compound fracture, radial pulse present, yellow tag, penetrating chest wound, diminished breath sounds, red tag, facial lacerations, walking and talking, green tag. Redirect to the urgent care 2 blocks north. A woman grabbed Lena's arm, her grip surprisingly strong. My daughter, she was right next to me when it happened. She's still there. They're still pulling people out. Ma'am, I need you to sit here. Lena gently detached the woman's fingers and guided her toward a plastic chair someone had dragged into the hallway. Yellow tag, probable concussion, possible cervical spine injury, stable enough to wait. The woman's coat smelled like coffee and pulverized drywall. Rita appeared at Lena's elbow, her voice low and urgent. We've got a problem in Trauma 1. The crash cart battery died mid-code. Patient's in VFib and we're doing manual compressions, but we need the defibrillator. There should be backup batteries. Should be. Aren't. Maintenance says they were scheduled for replacement last month, but the order got delayed. Lena felt something cold settle in her chest. The generators that didn't engage. The backup batteries that weren't replaced. The traffic lights that failed across the whole grid. Separate systems, separate failures, all happening simultaneously. Where's Dr. Chen? Still upstairs trying to get answers from the engineering team. Dr. Reeves wants you to keep triaging. Another ambulance, another stretcher, this one holding a teenager, maybe 17, with a piece of rebar protruding from his abdomen. His eyes found Lena's in the darkness, wide and terrified and asking a question she couldn't answer yet. She could hear his breathing, fast, shallow, the kind of hyperventilation that preceded shock. Red tag. Obviously red tag. But Trauma Bay 2 was still occupied by the crush injury, and Trauma Bay 1 had a code in progress, and the hallway was lined with yellow tags waiting for beds that didn't exist. How many trauma bays do we have? The paramedic asked, reading her hesitation. 2 functional, 1 in use for a code. And we've got 15 more criticals still coming from Grand Central, plus whatever else the night brings. The paramedic's face was grim. Welcome to disaster medicine, Doc. Lena made the call. Take him to Trauma 2. Move the crush injury to the hallway. Keep him on pressers and get me whoever's available to manage that rebar. Nobody pulls it until we have surgical backup and typed blood. She was making battlefield decisions in a Manhattan teaching hospital, choosing who got the limited resources, who waited, who might not make it because there simply weren't enough hands or equipment or light to save everyone. The protocols in the binder had seemed theoretical when she'd read them 3 months ago. Now they were just math, brutal, necessary math. A new sound cut through the siren wails, the building's fire alarm, distant but distinct, coming from somewhere above them. Rita's radio crackled immediately with reports of smoke on the 7th floor, automatic suppression systems offline, manual fire response teams assembling. Dr. Reeves materialized again, her expression darker than before. We're evacuating the ICU. 12 vented patients coming down to us in the next 10 minutes. We can't, Lena started. We don't have a choice. The fire suppression system needs power to function. Without it, we can't guarantee patient safety on the upper floors. Reeves's voice was flat, administrative, the tone of someone who'd already moved past the impossibility into pure execution mode. Clear whatever space you can. Vented patients take priority. Lena looked at the ER around her. Every bed full, stretchers lining the hallways, patients stacked 2 deep in spaces designed for 1. The yellow battery lights cast everything in apocalyptic amber. Through the half-open bay doors, she could see more ambulances queuing, their headlights creating a river of white light in the darkness. And somewhere in this chaos, buried in the cascade of simultaneous failures, was an answer to the question nobody had time to ask yet. Why hadn't the generators engaged? The ICU patients arrived on manual transport ventilators, each one requiring a respiratory therapist to squeeze an ambu bag in rhythm, while nurses guided the stretchers through the overcrowded ER, like negotiating a maze designed by someone's nightmare. Lena watched a 70-year-old woman roll past, her chest rising and falling only because a therapist's hands compressed air into her lungs every 5 seconds. The rhythmic hiss-click of the bag valve mask added another layer to the ER's new soundscape, a mechanical breathing that felt both reassuring and terrifying. Put her in the alcove by radiology, Rita directed, her clipboard now covered in hasty pencil marks that tracked patients by bed number and acuity level. And someone find me another oxygen tank, We're going through them twice as fast with manual ventilation. Lena had stopped counting patients at 70. The ER was designed for 42. They were now operating at something close to 200% capacity, with people in hallways, in storage rooms that had been hastily cleared, even in the staff break room where someone had shoved the coffee maker aside to make space for a cardiac monitor running on its last 20% of battery life. Her pager buzzed against her hip. She pulled it out, squinting at the screen in the dim light. Maintenance. Generator room. Urgent. She found Marcus already heading toward the stairwell, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness like a searchlight. You got the page too? What's in the generator room that needs 2 physicians? Lena asked, falling into step beside him. According to the text I just got from Reeves, something that maintenance can't explain. Marcus pushed through the stairwell door, and they were immediately swallowed by darker darkness. The battery lighting didn't extend to the service areas. Their footsteps echoed against concrete as they descended, the air growing cooler and carrying that distinctive basement smell of machine oil and old pipes. The generator room was 3 levels below ground, accessed through a corridor lined with exposed conduit and warning signs about electrical hazards. 2 maintenance workers stood outside the reinforced door, their coveralls streaked with grease, their expressions a mixture of confusion and something that looked like fear. Dr. Chen, Dr. Kovac. The older one, his name tag read Sullivan, Chief Engineer, gestured them forward. You're gonna want to see this. The generator room was the size of a small warehouse, dominated by 2 massive Caterpillar diesel generators that should have kicked on automatically the moment grid power failed. Should have. Instead, they sat silent and cold, their control panels dark except for a single red warning light blinking in sequence on each unit. Walk me through it, Marcus said, his physician voice replaced by something harder, more investigative. Sullivan approached the first generator, his flashlight revealing a control panel that had been opened, its interior guts exposed. Automatic transfer switch failed to engage. That's the system that detects power loss and signals the generators to start. So we came down here to do a manual override. Turn them on by hand, essentially. Except we can't. Why not? Because someone disabled them. Sullivan pointed to a series of wires that had been deliberately disconnected, their ends wrapped in electrical tape. These are the fuel injection control lines. Without them, the generators can't start even if we bypass every other safety system. And here, he moved to the second generator, showing an identical configuration. Same thing. Both units sabotaged. The word hung in the air like a physical presence. Sabotaged. Not failed. Not malfunctioned. Deliberately disabled. Lena felt her pulse accelerate. When was the last time these were inspected? Weekly preventive maintenance. Last check was Thursday afternoon. Everything was nominal. Sullivan's jaw tightened. I've worked in this hospital for 19 years. I know every inch of these systems. This wasn't accidental wear and tear. Someone who knew what they were doing came down here and specifically disconnected the components that would prevent startup. Marcus was already on his radio. Reeves, we have a situation in the generator room. The power failure wasn't accidental. The backup generators were deliberately sabotaged. We need to notify NYPD and possibly FBI, and we need to assume this is part of a larger... Static swallowed his words. He tried again, adjusting frequencies. More static. Sullivan held up his own radio, shaking his head. Building-wide communications went down about 10 minutes ago. We're trying to figure out if it's related to the power loss or something else. Something else. Lena heard her own voice, steady despite the adrenaline now flooding her system. The power grid failure, the generators disabled, the mass casualty event at Grand Central, now communications down. These aren't separate incidents. Marcus turned to look at her, his face half-shadowed in the flashlight glow. For the first time since she'd met him, she saw uncertainty in his expression. You're suggesting coordinated attack. I'm suggesting we have to operate as if it is, which means whatever's happening isn't over yet. She could feel the weight of the SOP binder 3 floors above them, its protocols for terrorist events and mass casualty disasters suddenly feeling less like paranoid bureaucracy and more like prophecy. Sullivan's radio crackled suddenly with a voice, broken and distant. Multiple fires reported across Manhattan. Con Ed confirms grid sabotage. All hospitals advised to... The signal died again, leaving only static. Marcus and Lena locked eyes. Above them, 3 floors up, nearly 100 patients lay in an ER running on failing batteries and manual interventions. 12 vented ICU patients breathed only because respiratory therapists squeezed bags by hand. And somewhere in that chaos was whoever had done this. Maybe still moving, maybe still acting. How long to reconnect those fuel lines? Marcus asked Sullivan. 30 minutes, maybe 40 if we can find the right connectors. But even then, we're looking at a cold start procedure that'll take another 20 minutes before we have stable power. An hour. They had patients who wouldn't survive an hour on battery backup. Lena's mind raced through the options, the protocols, the impossible math of disaster medicine. What about auxiliary power? Emergency circuits? Battery backup only, and those are draining faster than projected because we're pulling more load than they were designed for. Sullivan wiped sweat from his forehead despite the cool basement air. The building automation system keeps trying to reboot, which draws power spikes. I can disable it manually. Buy us maybe another 40 minutes of battery life. Do it, Marcus ordered, and get those generators reconnected as fast as possible. I don't care if it's not pretty. We just need power. They climbed the stairs in silence, their flashlight beams bouncing off concrete walls. Lena could hear Marcus's breathing, harsh and controlled, the sound of someone forcibly maintaining calm. When they reached the ground floor landing, he stopped. That binder you pulled out earlier, does it have protocols for this? For coordinated attack during mass casualty? Yes. Lena kept her voice level. But they assume we have communication with external agencies. Police, FBI, emergency management. If our radios are down, then we're on our own. Marcus pushed through the stairwell door back into the ER, and they were hit immediately by the wall of sound and smell and desperation. A nurse ran past holding a blood pressure cuff calling out numbers. Someone was crying in one of the curtained bays. The battery lights seemed dimmer than they had 15 minutes ago, or maybe that was just Lena's imagination painting everything darker. Rita appeared instantly, her face tight. We've got 2 more codes in progress, 3 patients decompensating, and EMS is reporting another wave of casualties from a fire on the Upper East Side. Also, one of our security guards thinks he saw someone in the medication room who wasn't supposed to be there, but by the time he got there, they were gone. Lena felt ice settle in her stomach. What medication room? The secure pharmacy, where we keep the controlled substances. Marcus's expression hardened into something Lena hadn't seen before. Not the confident attending, not the dismissive colleague, but something colder and more focused. Lock it down. Nobody in or out without direct physician authorization, and find me that security guard. I want to know exactly what he saw. The implications were stacking up like kindling waiting for a match. Sabotage generators, coordinated infrastructure failure, someone possibly moving through the hospital during the chaos. And buried somewhere in that pile of implications was the question that would determine whether they survived the night. Was the attack on the hospital infrastructure the goal, or was it just the opening move? The security guard's name was Mitchell, 24 years old, former Army MP with the kind of rigid posture that suggested the military hadn't left his system yet. He stood in the cramped office behind the nurse's station, his flashlight casting long shadows across filing cabinets that nobody had opened in years. The air smelled like old paper and the faint chemical sweetness of the hand sanitizer dispenser mounted on the wall. Describe exactly what you saw, Marcus said, his voice pitched low to avoid carrying into the chaos beyond the door. Mitchell's jaw worked for a moment before he spoke. I was doing a sweep of the 3rd floor, checking on the patients we moved down from the ICU. When I passed the secure pharmacy, I caught movement through the window in the door. Someone in scrubs, average height, moving fast between the medication cabinets. Male or female? Lena asked. Couldn't tell. They were wearing a surgical cap and mask, and the lighting up there is worse than down here. Mitchell's frustration was evident. By the time I got my key in the lock, they were gone. Out the back exit that leads to the service elevator shaft. Which doesn't work without power, Marcus said. Right. So either they went down the stairs or they're still somewhere on that floor. Lena pulled out the facilities map she'd grabbed from the incident command binder. A laminated sheet showing the hospital's layout with color-coded zones and emergency exits. The service stairs from 3rd floor connect to where? Mitchell traced the route with his finger. Down to the loading dock, up to the roof, or lateral access to the sky bridge that connects to the research building. The research building that's on a separate power grid, Lena said slowly, watching Marcus's expression shift as he understood. They're not trying to steal medications, Marcus said. They're using the pharmacy as a route to get to the research building, which means whatever they want is over there, not here. Rita pushed through the door, her clipboard clutched like a weapon. We've got bigger problems. The battery backup just failed in the East Wing. We're losing monitors on 12 patients, including 3 of the vented ICU transfers. And I just got word from one of the nurses. The oxygen tanks we've been cycling through are running low. We've got maybe 90 minutes before we start having to make choices about who gets supplemental O2. The numbers kept getting worse. Lena felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came before every major decision, the physical manifestation of pressure that had followed her since Boston, since the mistake she'd made that had sent her to New York in the first place. She pushed the thought away. This wasn't the time for that particular ghost. How many patients are oxygen dependent? She asked Rita. Critical dependency? 47. That includes the vents, the COPD exacerbations, the pneumonias, and the trauma patients with compromised airways. Rita's voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed the calculation she'd already done. We have 32 tanks at full capacity, maybe another 20 at partial. The math was simple and brutal. Not enough oxygen for everyone who needed it. Unless the generators came back online in the next hour, they'd be forced into battlefield triage, deciding who got to breathe and who didn't. Marcus's radio crackled suddenly with Sullivan's voice, clearer than before. Dr. Chen, we've reconnected the fuel lines on Generator 1. Attempting startup now. Stand by. Everyone in the room went still. Lena could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the collective hope hanging in the air like humidity. Somewhere deep in the building's guts, 3 floors down, a diesel engine was either about to roar to life or confirm their worst fears. The seconds stretched. 10, 15, 20. Sullivan's voice returned, flat and defeated. Negative start. The engine's turning over but not catching. Something else is wrong. We're investigating now. The hope evaporated instantly, replaced by something harder and more desperate. Marcus slammed his palm against the filing cabinet, the metallic bang echoing in the small office. How is that possible? You reconnected the fuel lines. I don't know, Doctor, but I'm starting to think whoever did this knew exactly how to make these generators unfixable without specialized parts we don't have on site. Lena moved to the window, looking out over the ER floor. In the amber battery lighting, she could see nurses moving between patients with practiced efficiency, could see families clustered in corners trying to stay out of the way, could see the teenager with the rebar still in trauma 2, now surrounded by a surgical team working with headlamps because the overhead lights were dead. All of them depending on systems that were failing in sequence, like dominoes. Quick question for everyone here, she said, turning back to face Marcus, Rita, and Mitchell. The words felt strange in her mouth, too casual for the moment, but something about speaking directly to the reality of their situation felt necessary. If you were in my position 3 months ago, new to this hospital, and you saw someone checking the emergency protocols while everyone else was relying on institutional knowledge, would you follow the SOP or trust your instincts? Marcus studied her for a long moment. Is there a point to this? The point is, I've been following protocols since I got here, and everyone's been treating it like I'm paranoid. But the protocols exist because someone, somewhere, already lived through the worst-case scenario. She tapped the facility's map. And the protocol for suspected internal threat during infrastructure failure says we secure critical resources, establish a chain of command, and assume nothing is accidental. We're already doing that, Rita said. No, we're reacting to each crisis as it happens. We're not thinking 3 moves ahead. Lena could feel the old training kicking in, the systematic approach she'd learned in Boston before everything fell apart. Someone disabled our generators, then triggered a mass casualty event to overwhelm us, then cut our communications, and now they're moving through the hospital during the chaos. This isn't random. It's a sequence. Mitchell straightened. You think they're after something specific in the research building? I think we need to assume they are, which means we need to know what's in that building that's worth this level of planning. Marcus pulled out his phone, the screen glowing blue in the darkness. Dr. Patterson runs the research wing. I'll try to reach him, but if the cell towers are as overloaded as I think they are. He dialed, waited, shook his head. Straight to voicemail. Then we go there, Lena said. Someone needs to physically check the research building and figure out what's at risk. We can't spare physicians right now, Rita interjected. We're already running on skeleton crew with the patient load we have. So we send security. Lena looked at Mitchell. You know the building layout? Basic knowledge, yeah. But if someone's already over there and they're willing to sabotage a hospital full of patients to cover their tracks, Mitchell let the implication hang. The door burst open and a resident appeared. Her scrubs spattered with blood, her expression frantic. Dr. Chen, we need you in trauma 1 immediately. The rebar patient just coded and we can't get a rhythm back. Marcus was moving before she finished the sentence. Lena right behind him. The office emptied in seconds. Everyone pulled back into the immediate crisis, the larger questions shoved aside by the urgent need to save the life in front of them. But as Lena ran toward trauma 1, dodging stretchers and family members and the mounting debris of disaster medicine, she couldn't shake the certainty settling in her chest. Whatever was happening tonight wasn't about the power failure. The power failure was just the cover, and they were running out of time to figure out what came next. The rebar patient's name was Christopher Huang, 17 years old, junior at Stuyvesant High School, member of the debate team. Lena learned this from his mother, who stood pressed against the trauma bay wall, her coat still dusty from Grand Central, watching them work on her son with the kind of silent terror that was worse than screaming. Assistole, Marcus called out, his hands positioned over Christopher's chest. Continue compressions. Someone get me epi. The crash cart was dead. The medication dispensary was offline. Everything that should have been automatic now required someone running to the locked pharmacy, unlocking it with a physical key, finding the right drug in bins organized by a system nobody had used in 5 years. Lena took over compressions while a nurse sprinted toward the pharmacy. Her hands found the center of Christopher's sternum, her arms locked straight, her body weight driving down in the rhythm she'd practiced 10,000 times. The rebar protruded obscenely from his abdomen, wrapped now in sterile drapes to prevent movement. Each compression risked driving it deeper, but without circulation, the internal bleeding didn't matter. "Come on," she heard herself saying. "Come on, Christopher." Mrs. Huang made a sound. Not quite a sob, not quite a word. The nurse returned with epinephrine. Marcus administered it through the IV line, and they waited through another cycle of compressions. 30 compressions. Pause. Check rhythm on the battery-powered monitor that was down to 18% power. Still a systole. Again, Marcus said. They worked for 12 minutes. Lena's arms burned, her shoulders screaming in protest, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Because stopping meant telling Mrs. Huang that her son, her debate team champion who'd been standing in Grand Central waiting for a train home, was gone. Marcus's hand on her shoulder, gentle but firm. "Lena, time of death, 0147. She stepped back, her arms trembling. Christopher Huang lay still on the table, the rebar still embedded, his face peaceful in a way that felt like mockery. Mrs. Huang's keening filled the trauma bay, a sound of grief so raw it felt like a physical presence. Lena stripped off her gloves and walked out, past the curtain, past the other patients watching with wide eyes, past Rita who tried to say something but Lena couldn't hear over the roaring in her ears. She made it to the supply closet before her hands started shaking properly. The door closed behind her, and she was alone in darkness that smelled like disinfectant and cardboard. She pressed her palms against the metal shelving, feeling the cool surface against her skin, trying to breathe through the tightness in her chest. Boston, the pneumonia case that wasn't pneumonia. The sepsis she'd missed because she'd been too focused on the presenting symptoms and not the underlying infection. The patient who'd coded while she'd been charting in another room. The investigation. The quiet suggestion that maybe a change of scenery would be good for everyone. 3 months in New York, trying to rebuild, trying to prove she could be the physician she'd trained to be. And now Christopher Huang was dead because they didn't have power for the crash cart. The door opened. Marcus stood silhouetted against the amber emergency lighting. First patient loss is always the hardest. It's not my first. Her voice came out steady despite everything. First one tonight, I meant. He stepped inside, letting the door close. We're going to lose more before this is over. The oxygen situation is critical, and Sullivan just confirmed that someone also sabotaged the fuel supply lines to both generators. We can reconnect components all night, but without diesel, they won't run. Lena straightened. Someone cut the fuel lines? Deliberately. Which means whoever planned this wanted to ensure we couldn't restore power no matter what we tried. Marcus's face was grim. Reeves just made the call. We're implementing crisis standards of care. Triage protocols for resource allocation. You know what that means? She knew. It meant they'd officially moved from standard emergency medicine into battlefield conditions. It meant deciding which patients got the limited oxygen, the limited monitoring, the limited everything. It meant more Christopher Huangs. I need you sharp for what's coming, Marcus continued. We've got 53 patients who are oxygen dependent and resources for maybe 30. Rita's setting up a triage committee, but ultimately the decisions fall to the attending physicians. That's me and you. I'm not an attending here. I'm 3 months into a transfer. You're the physician who read the SOP binder and knew something was wrong before anyone else did. You're the one who ran that chest decompression in the dark without hesitation. Marcus met her eyes. Whatever happened in Boston that sent you here, tonight isn't about that. Tonight is about keeping as many people alive as possible with what we have. Can you do that? Lena felt something shift in her chest. Not absolution. She didn't deserve that. But maybe purpose. Yes. Good. Because Mitchell just reported movement in the Sky Bridge again. Whoever's doing this is still active, and we need to figure out their end game before they make things worse. They returned to the main floor together. The ER had transformed further in the 20 minutes since Christopher's code. The hallways now lined with patients on gurneys, some conscious and watching the chaos around them, others sedated or unconscious. The battery lights had dimmed noticeably, casting everything in deeper amber. Rita met them at the central desk with her updated census. 53 oxygen-dependent patients, 32 full tanks, 19 partial. At current consumption rates, we have 67 minutes before we start running dry. Just over an hour. Lena looked at the list of names, ages, conditions. Each one a person, a life, a family waiting in the darkness. The protocol was clear. Triage based on likelihood of survival, functional status, and resource availability. Save the most with the least. But protocol didn't account for the mother in the corner holding her asthmatic daughter. Didn't account for the elderly man with COPD who'd survived 3 wars. Didn't account for the fact that choosing meant someone died. "I'll take the West Wing," she told Marcus. "You take East. We make the calls separately, then compare." He nodded. They both understood what they were really doing, sharing the weight so neither had to carry it alone. Lena started her rounds, moving between beds with her clipboard and her failing flashlight. Each patient assessment was clinical, systematic, exactly by the book, but each decision felt like carving away pieces of herself. A 47-year-old with pneumonia and multiple comorbidities. Yellow priority, reduce oxygen flow. A 19-year-old with asthma exacerbation. Green priority, maintain full support. An 82-year-old with end-stage COPD. Her hand hesitated over the clipboard. "Dr. Kovac?" She looked up to find Mitchell standing there, his radio crackling with static. "We just got confirmation from the research building. Someone accessed the Level 4 biocontainment lab. Dr. Patterson's on his way here now, but he said you need to hear this directly. The biocontainment lab, where they kept infectious disease samples, experimental pathogens, things that required specialized protocols just to study safely." Lena felt the final piece click into place with the cold certainty of diagnosis. It's not about the hospital. It never was. Dr. Gerald Patterson arrived through the Skybridge entrance, flanked by 2 research assistants who looked like they'd run the entire way. Patterson was mid-60s, with the kind of weathered face that suggested decades spent in laboratories and crisis meetings. His white coat was buttoned wrong, his ID badge twisted sideways, and his hands shook slightly as he set down a tablet on the nurse's station desk. "The Level 4 lab was breached 43 minutes ago," he said without preamble. "Security logs show someone used Dr. Sarah Chen's credentials to access the airlock system." Marcus straightened. "Sarah Chen's been on sabbatical in Singapore for 6 months. "Exactly, which means someone cloned her biometric data and keycard." Patterson pulled up images on his tablet, security footage showing a figure in full containment suit moving through the lab's airlock. They knew the protocols, knew how to bypass the secondary authentication, and they accessed Storage Vault 3. Lena felt her stomach drop. "What's in Vault 3? Patterson's expression darkened. "Samples from our emerging infectious disease repository. 15 different pathogens, including 2 that are CDC select agents requiring BSL-4 containment. Hemorrhagic fever viruses, antibiotic-resistant bacteria, and..." He paused, his voice dropping. "An experimental viral vector we've been developing for gene therapy research. Please tell me that vector is secured," Marcus said. It was, until approximately 43 minutes ago. Patterson swiped through more images. The vault's interior camera shows our intruder removing 3 cryogenic storage vials. We can't identify which samples without doing a full inventory, which requires power we don't have. The implications cascaded through Lena's mind like falling dominoes. Sabotaged generators, mass casualty event, communications blackout, all of it designed to create chaos while someone walked into a biocontainment lab and stole potentially weaponizable pathogens. Where are those samples now? Unknown. The intruder left through the service exit, which dumps into the loading dock area. After that, the trail goes cold. Patterson's hands were definitely shaking now. "We need to notify CDC, FBI, Homeland Security immediately. But with communications down, we're isolated," Rita finished, which was probably the point. Lena moved to the window overlooking the ambulance bay. Outside, the city was still dark. Emergency vehicles creating rivers of red and blue light through streets jammed with stalled cars. How many hospitals were in the same situation right now? How many were dealing with their own disasters while someone moved through the chaos stealing biological weapons? Behind her, Marcus was coordinating with Patterson, talking about containment protocols and decontamination procedures. But Lena's mind had snagged on something else, a detail that didn't fit the pattern. "Dr. Patterson," she interrupted, "your gene therapy vector. What was it designed to treat?" He blinked at the apparent non sequitur. "It's a modified adenovirus designed to carry corrective genes for inherited disorders. Specifically, we were targeting cystic fibrosis and certain immune deficiencies. Why? Because gene therapy vectors can be modified to carry other payloads. If someone wanted to create a targeted bioweapon, they'd need a delivery mechanism that could penetrate cells efficiently." She was thinking out loud now, the pieces assembling themselves. The hemorrhagic fever viruses and resistant bacteria, those are terrifying, but they're also traceable. CDC would identify them immediately, but a modified vector carrying a custom payload would be virtually undetectable until it was too late. Patterson finished, his face going pale. Jesus Christ. You think they're planning to weaponize our research? I think we need to assume worst-case scenario. Lena turned back to Marcus. We need to find that intruder before they leave the hospital complex. Lock down every exit, search every floor, and... Her pager buzzed. Then Marcus's. Then every radio in the room crackled to life simultaneously with a voice that cut through the static with crystal clarity. Attention Mount Sinai Memorial Hospital staff. This is an automated emergency broadcast. A credible threat has been made against this facility. All personnel are advised to evacuate immediately. This is not a drill. Evacuate immediately. The message repeated, mechanical and emotionless, while everyone in the office stared at each other in stunned silence. That's not our system, Rita said finally. Our emergency broadcast network is hardwired to the administration office. It requires manual activation and authentication codes. Then who? Marcus started. The answer hit Lena with the force of a diagnosis she should have seen hours ago. They're trying to get us to evacuate, to scatter the staff and patients outside where we can't maintain security or control. It's a distraction. Or it's a real threat, and we're sitting here debating while one of Patterson's assistants began. The lights came on. Not all of them. Not the full blaze of normal hospital operation, but enough. The overhead fluorescents in the ER flickered to life. The monitors around patient beds beeped as they powered up. And somewhere in the building, the ventilation system rumbled back to operational status. For exactly 15 seconds, the relief was palpable. Nurses cheered. Patients sat up, disoriented by the sudden brightness. The constant amber emergency lighting disappeared, replaced by the familiar harsh white of hospital illumination. Then the lights cut out again, plunging everything back into battery-powered dimness. But in those 15 seconds, Lena had seen something. Or rather, she'd seen the absence of something. The medication room door, which should have been locked according to Mitchell's earlier report, was standing open. And in the brief moment of full lighting, she'd caught a glimpse of someone in scrubs moving quickly toward the stairwell. Rita, who's assigned to the medication room right now? She asked, her voice sharp. Rita checked her clipboard, frowning. Nobody. It's supposed to be locked down pending. Lena was already moving, pushing through the door and into the hallway. Behind her, she heard Marcus calling her name, but she didn't stop. The stairwell door was still swinging when she reached it, the pneumatic closer hissing softly in the darkness. She grabbed the door handle and pulled, entering the concrete stairwell where the emergency lighting cast everything in deep shadows. Footsteps echoed from below, someone descending quickly, their shoes squeaking against the stairs. "Stop!" Lena shouted, her voice bouncing off the walls. "Hospital security!" The footsteps accelerated. Lena started down after them, her hand gripping the railing, her mind cataloging every stupid decision that had led to this moment. Chasing a potential bioterrorist through a dark stairwell, alone, unarmed, with nothing but her medical training and stubborn refusal to let another patient die tonight. She rounded the landing between floors and caught a glimpse of the figure below. Average height, surgical cap, mask, completely anonymous in standard scrubs. They hit the basement-level door and pushed through, disappearing into the corridor beyond. Lena followed, bursting into the basement hallway that smelled like machine oil and something chemical she couldn't identify. The corridor stretched in both directions, lined with pipes and conduit. The emergency lighting here was even dimmer, creating pools of shadow between weak amber bulbs. Movement to her left. She turned and saw the figure running toward the loading dock exit, one hand clutching something against their chest. A small insulated container, the kind used for transporting biological samples. "I said stop!" Lena sprinted after them, her legs burning, her breath harsh in the confined space. The figure reached the loading dock door, slammed their shoulder against the crash bar, and burst outside into the night. Lena was 5 seconds behind them, emerging into the loading area where emergency vehicles sat abandoned, their lights still flashing in the darkness. The figure stopped, turned, and in the wash of red and blue light from the ambulances, Lena finally saw their face as they pulled down the surgical mask. It was Dr. Angela Reeves, the hospital administrator, the woman who'd been coordinating their disaster response all night. "Dr. Kovac," Reeves said, her voice perfectly calm, perfectly controlled. "You should have stayed upstairs." Lena's world tilted. Behind her, she heard footsteps. Marcus and Mitchell emerging from the loading dock entrance. In front of her, Reeves held the insulated container like it was the most natural thing in the world. "The samples," Lena said. "You took them. I'm protecting them." Reeves's expression was almost pitying. "You have no idea what's really happening here." And in that moment, Standing in the darkness with stolen pathogens and a hospital full of dying patients behind her, Lena realized she was about to learn exactly why someone would burn an entire city to cover their tracks. The loading dock smelled like diesel exhaust and rain-slicked asphalt. Lena's pulse hammered in her ears as she watched Reeves clutch the insulated container, the woman's face eerily composed in the strobing emergency lights. Marcus moved to Lena's left, Mitchell to her right, forming an unconscious semicircle that blocked the most direct escape routes. "Dr. Reeves," Marcus said carefully, his hands visible and non-threatening, "whatever you think you're doing, we can work through this. Just put down the container." Reeves laughed, a short, brittle sound that didn't match her usual administrative composure. "Work through this? Marcus, you don't even know what this is. None of you do." "Then explain it," Lena said. "The generators weren't just sabotaged randomly. The mass casualty event wasn't coincidence. You orchestrated all of it to create cover for stealing those samples. Why? Not stealing, securing." Reeves's grip tightened on the container. "Patterson's research isn't what he told you it is. That gene therapy vector? It's not designed to treat cystic fibrosis. It's a delivery system for a next-generation bioweapon commissioned by a defense contractor through shell corporations buried so deep that even Patterson doesn't know who's really funding his work." The words hung in the cold air like condensation. Lena felt the logic of it clicking into place even as she wanted to reject it. "You're saying our research wing is developing weapons?" "I'm saying Patterson is a brilliant scientist who believes he's curing diseases while his funding comes from people who want to engineer them." Reeves shifted her weight, her eyes tracking their positions. "I found the paper trail 6 months ago. Buried procurement records, classified DoD communications, offshore accounts. They're using Mount Sinai as a front for black-budget bioweapons research." Marcus shook his head. "Even if that's true, you disabled our generators during a mass casualty event. You put hundreds of patients at risk. Christopher Huang died because we didn't have power for the crash cart." Something flickered across Reeves's face. Regret, maybe, or its shadow. "I didn't trigger the Grand Central collapse. That was real. Just convenient timing. But yes, I disabled the generators. Because if I'd simply walked out with these samples during normal operations, security would have stopped me in 30 seconds. This way, in the chaos, I could move freely." "People are dying upstairs," Lena said, her voice hard. "Right now. While you're standing here justifying domestic terrorism, I'm preventing something worse. If these samples fall into the wrong hands, they're in your hands," Mitchell interrupted, his hand moving slowly toward his belt where his radio was clipped. "That makes you the wrong hands." Reeves noticed the movement. Her free hand went to her pocket and emerged holding something small and metallic. For a surreal moment, Lena thought it was a gun. Then she recognized it. A remote trigger, the kind used for controlled demolitions or emergency shutdowns. "The fuel lines I cut," Reeves said quietly. "I also placed thermite charges on the remaining diesel reserves. Enough to ensure those generators never run again tonight, but shaped to prevent collateral damage to the building structure. This trigger activates them." "You're bluffing," Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Sullivan found the disconnected fuel injection lines but not the charges. They're well hidden, and he had no reason to look for them." Reeves's thumb hovered over the trigger. "If I activate this, Mount Sinai stays dark for the next 12 hours minimum. How many of your oxygen-dependent patients survive that long?" The math was instant and brutal. Lena thought of the 53 names on Rita's list. The elderly COPD patient she'd been triaging when Mitchell interrupted, the asthmatic child in her mother's arms. 12 hours without power meant no ventilators, no oxygen concentrators, no way to support the critical patients already hanging on by threads. "So what's your play here?" Lena asked, stalling, trying to think 3 moves ahead the way the protocols taught. "You walk away with samples that you claim are bioweapons, and we just let you go? Trust that you're the good guy in this scenario? I'm taking these samples to a journalist who's been investigating the defense contractor for 2 years. She has a secure facility where they can be analyzed independently, and she has the platform to expose what's really happening." Reeves's voice was steady, certain. "But I need 6 hours head start before anyone reports this. 6 hours for me to get far enough away that they can't intercept me. And if we don't give you that time?" Marcus challenged. Reeves's thumb pressed slightly on the trigger. Not enough to activate, but enough to show she meant it. "Then I destroy the diesel reserves. Your hospital stays dark, and dozens die. But at least the bioweapons stay contained here where CDC can eventually secure them. Your choice." Lena felt the weight of the decision pressing down like physical force. Every instinct screamed that you don't negotiate with someone who'd sabotaged a hospital. But every calculation said that Reeves held all the leverage. If she was telling the truth about the thermite charges, calling her bluff meant condemning patients to death. There's a third option, Lena said slowly. The idea was forming even as she spoke, pulling together threads from the protocols she'd memorized and the situation unfolding in real time. You give us the samples. We arrange independent verification of your claims about the research funding. If you're right, we help you expose it through proper channels. Proper channels? Reeves's laugh was sharp. Dr. Kovac, I spent 6 months going through proper channels. I filed reports with the Hospital Ethics Board, contacted federal oversight agencies, even reached out to the Inspector General's office. Every inquiry got buried or redirected. These people have reach you can't imagine. Then we go public immediately, Marcus interjected. We call a press conference, lay out everything you know. With what evidence? I had documentation, but it was all on secure servers that went down when the grid failed. Convenient, isn't it? Reeves's expression hardened. They've been cleaning up loose ends all night. I'm probably one of those loose ends. A sound echoed from inside the loading dock. Footsteps, multiple sets, moving fast. Patterson's voice called out, Dr. Chen? Dr. Kovac? Where are you? Reeves's hand tightened on the trigger. Time's up. Make your decision. Let me walk, or watch this hospital go dark for real. Lena's mind raced through the calculus. Reeves was either a whistleblower trying to prevent a catastrophe or a domestic terrorist with an elaborate cover story. The samples she carried were either bioweapons that needed to be secured or legitimate research being stolen. And the choice Lena made in the next 30 seconds would determine whether dozens of patients upstairs lived or died. She thought about Christopher Huang, dead on the table because they didn't have power. Thought about the mistake in Boston that had sent her running to New York, trying to rebuild a career built on protocols and careful decisions. Thought about 3 months of being dismissed for checking the SOP binder. The protocols said never negotiate with threats. The protocols said secure the biological samples at any cost. The protocols said trust the established chain of command. But the protocols hadn't accounted for someone inside the chain of command being the threat. Marcus, Lena said quietly, not taking her eyes off Reeves. What was your read on Patterson when he briefed us? Did he seem like someone who knew his research was weapons development? Marcus hesitated. He seemed legitimately shocked. But that doesn't mean... It means either he's a phenomenal actor or Reeves is telling the truth about him being unknowing. Lena took a slow step forward. Dr. Reeves, you said you found procurement records. What specifically did they show? Purchase orders for biosafety equipment way beyond what's needed for standard research, classified courier services, and payments from a shell corporation called Blackwell Medical Solutions that doesn't exist in any public database but shows up in leaked DoD documents from 2019. Too specific to be improvised, too detailed to be simple paranoia. Lena made her choice. 6 hours, she said, but you leave the trigger. And you tell us exactly who this journalist is and how to verify they received the samples. Lena, what the hell? Marcus started. We don't have time for debate. Lena cut him off. Either we trust that Reeves is trying to prevent something worse, or we condemn our patients to death on principle. I'm choosing to keep people alive tonight. Reeves studied her for a long moment. Then slowly, she set down the remote trigger on top of a nearby dumpster. The journalist's name is Elena Martinez. She works for ProPublica. You can verify receipt through her encrypted contact line. She pulled a card from her pocket and tossed it to Lena. 6 hours. Then you can report whatever you want. She turned and walked toward the loading dock exit. The insulated container still clutched against her chest. Mitchell moved to intercept, but Lena held up a hand stopping him. They watched Reeves disappear into the darkness beyond the emergency vehicle lights. 30 seconds later, Patterson and 2 security guards burst through the loading dock door, breathless and alarmed. Did you see her? Patterson demanded. Reeves, she stole samples from my lab. We saw her, Marcus said, his voice tight. She's gone, and Dr. Kovac just let her walk. All eyes turned to Lena. She felt the weight of their stares, felt the enormity of what she'd just done. Either she'd made the right call and prevented a bioweapons program from going operational, or she'd been manipulated by a terrorist and would spend the rest of her career answering for it. We have work to do, she said, picking up the remote trigger and handing it to Patterson. Get Sullivan down here to disarm whatever charges Reeves planted, and someone get communications working. We need to contact the CDC and FBI, tell them everything, and let them sort out the truth. Marcus pulled her aside as the others scattered to their tasks. That was either the bravest or stupidest decision I've ever seen a physician make. Yeah, Lena said quietly. Ask me in 6 hours which one it was. Sullivan found the thermite charges exactly where Reeves said they'd be. Shaped incendiaries positioned on the diesel storage tanks with the kind of precision that suggested military training or demolitions expertise. He spent 40 minutes disarming them with hands that shook from adrenaline and the knowledge that one wrong cut would incinerate the hospital's last chance at power restoration. When he finally emerged from the generator room, his face was gray. She wasn't bluffing, he told Marcus and Lena, holding up the deactivated trigger mechanism. These would have turned those tanks into slag. We'd have been running on battery backup until Con Ed restored grid power, and they're saying that's minimum 8 hours out. The timeline was impossibly tight. Lena checked her watch, 0319 hours. They'd been running on emergency power for over an hour, and the oxygen situation had degraded from critical to catastrophic. Rita's latest census showed 41 patients in immediate respiratory distress, with tank reserves down to 11 full units and scattered partials. "Can you get the generators running now?" Lena asked Sullivan. "The fuel injection lines are reconnected and the charges are disarmed, but we still need to bleed air from the fuel system and run startup diagnostics. Best case, 20 minutes to stable power." He wiped sweat from his forehead despite the basement chill. "That's if nothing else is sabotage that we haven't found yet. 20 minutes. Lena did the math against Rita's oxygen consumption projections. They'd lose patients in the next 20 minutes. The only question was how many. She climbed the stairs back to the ER, her legs heavy with exhaustion and the weight of decisions that kept compounding. The main floor was organized chaos. Nurses had adapted to the limitations, creating manual ventilation rotations where respiratory therapists spelled each other every 15 minutes to prevent fatigue. The hallways were lined with families who'd been cleared from patient areas to maximize workspace. And in the center of it all, Rita orchestrated the symphony with her clipboard and radio, triaging resources like a general distributing ammunition during siege warfare. "We lost 2 more while you were downstairs," Rita said without preamble when Lena reached the nurses' station. 84-year-old with end-stage COPD and a 67-year-old post-cardiac arrest. Both were yellow priority on your assessment. Yellow priority, which meant Lena had tagged them as lower survival probability, which meant they'd been allocated reduced oxygen, which meant her triage decisions had directly contributed to their deaths. The logic was sound, the protocol was correct, but it still felt like carving away pieces of her soul. "How many others are decompensating?" she asked. 6 critical, maybe 8 if we don't get power in the next 10 minutes. Rita's voice was flat, professional, but her eyes betrayed the toll this night was taking. "The asthmatic child you marked green priority is starting to struggle. Mother's asking for you specifically." Lena found them in the pediatric observation area, a corner of the ER that had been hastily converted when the ICU evacuation brought kids downstairs. The girl was maybe 9 years old, sitting upright on her mother's lap, her breathing rapid and shallow. Each inhale produced a soft wheeze that Lena could hear from 5 feet away. "Dr. Kovac," the mother said, her arms wrapped protectively around her daughter. "Please, she's getting worse." Lena knelt beside them, pulling out her stethoscope. The girl's name was Emma Chen, no relation to Marcus, and her chart showed a history of exercise-induced asthma, usually well-controlled on maintenance inhalers. But stress could trigger attacks, and tonight qualified as maximum stress. Lena listened to her lungs. Tight, wheezy, air movement diminished in the lower lobes. "Emma, I need you to take a slow breath for me," Lena said gently. "As deep as you can." The girl tried. The wheeze intensified. Her oxygen saturation on the portable monitor read 91%, low enough to be concerning, high enough that she didn't qualify for the critical oxygen allocation under current triage protocols. "She needs a breathing treatment," the mother said. "At home, we'd use her nebulizer, but nebulizers require power we don't have right now." Lena kept her voice calm, reassuring, while her mind calculated how many minutes they had before Emma's condition crossed the line from manageable to critical. "I'm going to give her an inhaler with a spacer, which will help, and we'll monitor her closely. If she gets worse, we'll move her up the priority list." What she didn't say. Moving Emma up meant moving someone else down, meant choosing between a 9-year-old with acute asthma and an elderly man with chronic COPD, meant playing God with oxygen tanks and triage tags. The mother understood anyway. Her grip on Emma tightened. "How long until the power comes back?" "Soon," Lena lied, because sometimes hope was the only medication she could prescribe. She administered the inhaler treatment and moved on to the next patient, then the next, working through the deteriorating cases with the systematic focus that had carried her through residency. But underneath the clinical assessments, her mind kept circling back to Reeves and the samples and the choice she'd made in the loading dock. Marcus found her during a brief pause, pulling her aside to the darkened radiology alcove. "I just got off a working cell connection. Took me 45 minutes to get through. FBI is aware of the situation, CDC is mobilizing a response team, and there's a bolo out for Reeves. Did you mention the 6-hour agreement?" "I mentioned that we were under duress and made a tactical decision to prevent further casualties." His expression was unreadable in the dim light. Whether that decision was right or wrong is going to be decided by people way above our pay grade. And the journalist, Elena Martinez? ProPublica confirmed she's a real investigative reporter who's been working on defense contractor oversight stories. Beyond that, they wouldn't comment. Marcus paused. For what it's worth, Sullivan's analysis of those thermite charges confirms they were professionally placed. Reeves has training we didn't know about. Before Lena could respond, the overhead lights flickered. Once, twice. Then surged to full brightness with an electric hum that sounded like a choir of angels. The monitors around patient beds beeped as they powered up. The ventilators switched from battery to line power with audible clicks. And somewhere in the building's depths, the HVAC system roared back to life. The ER erupted in cheers. Nurses high-fived, patients sat up with relief-washed faces, and even Marcus allowed himself a tight smile. Sullivan's voice crackled over the radio. Main power restored. Both generators running at stable capacity. We're back online. Rita was already moving, coordinating the systematic restoration of services. Oxygen concentrators came online, reducing the drain on portable tanks. The medication dispensary rebooted, giving access to the full pharmacy. The electronic health records flickered back to life, showing the night's devastation laid out in data points and timestamps. Lena returned to Emma Chen, where the oxygen concentrator was now humming beside the bed. The girl's breathing had already eased, her saturation climbing to 96%. Her mother looked up at Lena with tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for not giving up." But they had given up. On Christopher Huang, on the elderly COPD patients, on everyone who died in the hours between power failure and restoration. The protocols called it triage. The truth called it choosing who lived and who didn't. Lena helped stabilize 3 more critical patients before the adrenaline finally wore off, and she found herself leaning against the wall outside the supply closet, her hands shaking with delayed stress response. Marcus appeared beside her, 2 cups of terrible vending machine coffee in his hands. "Sullivan wants to show us something in the security footage," he said, handing her a cup. "He managed to restore the backup recording systems. There's video from the research building Skybridge." They gathered in the security office, a cramped room filled with monitors that now displayed cascading feeds from cameras throughout the hospital complex. Sullivan pulled up footage time-stamped 0223 hours, showing the Skybridge connecting the main hospital to the research wing. The video showed Reeves in full biohazard gear, moving through the Skybridge with practiced efficiency. But she wasn't alone. 3 other figures in similar suits accompanied her, and they were carrying equipment: portable containment units, environmental sensors, documentation materials. "She had a team," Mitchell said, leaning forward. "This wasn't a solo operation." Sullivan advanced the footage, showing the team entering the research building, bypassing security with what looked like administrative override codes. The timestamp showed they'd spent exactly 17 minutes inside before emerging with the sample containers. "Now watch this," Sullivan said, pulling up different footage from an exterior camera. It showed a white panel van waiting in the research building loading area. The timestamp was 0241 hours, right when Lena and Marcus were triaging patients upstairs. The team loaded the containers, climbed in, and the van drove away. "Get a license plate?" Marcus asked. Obscured, deliberately. Sullivan froze the image, enhancing what he could. "But look at the side panel." Lena squinted at the screen. Barely visible in the ambient lighting was a logo, a medical caduceus wrapped in barbed wire. Below it, text too small to read clearly, but suggesting some kind of medical transport service. "That's not a standard biomedical courier," Patterson said from the doorway. They all turned to find him standing there, his face haggard. "I've been reviewing our procurement records since Reeves made her accusations. She was right. Blackwell Medical Solutions has been routing funds through our research accounts for 18 months. And that van matches the description of vehicles used by a private contractor called Lazarus Medical Transport." "Which is?" Lena prompted. "A company that officially provides medical logistics but has known ties to defense intelligence operations?" Patterson's voice was hollow. "I've been weaponizing viruses for the Pentagon and didn't even know it." The room fell silent except for the hum of electronic equipment and the distant sounds of the ER returning to semi-normal operations. Lena thought about Reeves's desperate gambit, about the choice to let her walk, about the samples now presumably in the hands of either an investigative journalist or whoever Reeves really worked for. Marcus's phone buzzed. He checked it, his expression darkening. FBI just sent an update. They tracked Reeves's van to a location in New Jersey. When tactical teams arrived, they found the van abandoned. No samples, no personnel, no evidence except trace biohazard materials that'll take weeks to analyze. "So she got away," Mitchell said. or she completed her handoff and went dark. Marcus looked at Lena. Either way, those samples are in the wind, and we're the ones who let them go. Dawn broke over Manhattan with the kind of pale gray light that made the city look washed out and hungover. Lena stood in the ambulance bay, watching the last emergency vehicles pull away as Con Ed crews worked to restore full grid power. The temperature had dropped another 5 degrees, her breath visible in small clouds, her scrubs still spattered with Christopher Huang's blood. The final count was brutal. 11 deaths directly attributed to the power failure, 47 patients transferred to other facilities once communications were restored, and 138 survivors who'd spent the worst night of their lives in a hospital that had nearly become their tomb. The media trucks were already assembling on the street beyond the police barricades, their satellite dishes pointing skyward like hungry flowers seeking sun. Marcus emerged from the building carrying 2 fresh cups of coffee that actually smelled decent. Someone had gotten the real machines working again. He handed one to Lena without speaking, and they stood together watching the city wake up to news of what the networks were already calling the Manhattan Hospital Crisis. FBI wants formal statements from both of us, Marcus said finally. Also CDC, Homeland Security, and probably half a dozen other agencies I've never heard of. Patterson's already lawyered up. Smart. Lena sipped the coffee, feeling the heat spread through her chest. What about the samples? ProPublica published a story an hour ago. Elena Martinez, the journalist Reeves mentioned, released a preliminary report based on documentation that was anonymously provided, showing evidence of unauthorized bioweapons development at multiple research hospitals nationwide. Mount Sinai is mentioned specifically, along with procurement records and classified communications that match what Reeves told us. Lena processed this, so she was telling the truth. About some of it, anyway. Whether that justifies sabotaging a hospital and stealing samples is a question lawyers and ethicists are going to debate for years. Marcus's voice was carefully neutral. The FBI also confirmed that Lazarus Medical Transport is under investigation for ties to a defense contractor that's been running black-budget research programs. No confirmation yet on whether the samples were secured or weaponized. The uncertainty hung between them like the morning fog rolling off the East River. Lena had made a choice in that loading dock, had weighed lives against principles, and decided that keeping patients alive mattered more than following protocol. Whether history would judge that choice as heroic or catastrophic remained to be seen. Dr. Kovac? A nurse appeared in the doorway, young and exhausted. There's someone here asking for you. Says it's important. Lena followed her inside, back through the ER that was slowly transforming from war zone to functional medical facility. The hallways were being cleared, patients were being properly bedded, and the harsh overhead lights revealed the full scope of the damage. Medical equipment scattered everywhere, supply wrappers carpeting the floor, and the lingering smell of stress and fear that no amount of industrial cleaner could immediately erase. Emma Chen waited by the nurse's station, holding her mother's hand. The girl's breathing was easy now, her color good, her oxygen saturation a healthy 98% on room air. When she saw Lena, her face lit up. I wanted to say thank you, Emma said, her voice clear and strong. My mom said you saved my life. Lena knelt down to the girl's level. You did the hard part, Emma. You stayed calm and let us help you. That takes real courage. The mother pressed a folded piece of paper into Lena's hand. She wrote you a note, drew you a picture too. Lena unfolded it carefully. The drawing showed a stick figure doctor with a stethoscope standing next to a stick figure girl, both of them smiling under a bright yellow sun. Above it, in careful 9-year-old handwriting, thank you for being brave when everything was dark. Something broke loose in Lena's chest. Not quite tears, but close. She'd spent 3 months in New York trying to rebuild after Boston, trying to prove she could be the physician who made the right calls under pressure. Tonight had tested that in ways she'd never imagined, and she still didn't know if she'd passed or failed. But Emma Chen was breathing, and her mother was smiling, and maybe that was the only measure that mattered. You're very welcome, Emma. Stay strong, okay? The girl nodded seriously, then threw her arms around Lena's neck in an impulsive hug before her mother could stop her. Lena hugged back, breathing in the smell of hospital soap and children's shampoo and survival. After they left, Rita appeared with the final incident report on her clipboard. Her eyes were red-rimmed from exhaustion, but her posture was still military straight. The administration wants a full debrief at 0900. All attending physicians, charge nurses, and incident command personnel. They're bringing in external investigators to review our crisis response protocols. Translation: they're looking for someone to blame, Marcus said, joining them. Probably. Rita's expression was grim. But for what it's worth, the staff consensus is that you two kept us from losing a lot more people than we did. The decision to implement crisis standards of care, the oxygen triage protocols, even... She paused, choosing her words carefully. Even the choice to prioritize patient survival over securing the biological samples. People noticed. Lena thought about Reeves, about the samples now scattered to unknown locations, about the ProPublica article that would trigger investigations and recriminations and possibly criminal charges for everyone involved. Rita, if you had been in that loading dock, would you have made the same call? Rita considered this for a long moment. Ask me again when we know what Reeves actually did with those samples. If they end up weaponized and people die, then no, you made the wrong call. If they end up exposing a bioweapons program that would have killed thousands, then yes, you made the right one. But that's the thing about medicine in the moment, isn't it? We make decisions with incomplete information and live with the consequences. The intercom crackled overhead. Code Blue, Trauma Bay 1, Code Blue, Trauma Bay 1. The three of them moved immediately, muscle memory overriding exhaustion. Lena grabbed a crash cart, one that actually worked now, with power and charged batteries and all the equipment that should have been available when Christopher Huang coded. The ER was fully lit, fully powered, fully functional. Everything was back to normal except for the people who'd lived through the night and would carry those hours with them forever. The Code Blue was a 52-year-old man, one of the Grand Central casualties who'd been stable enough to wait, but whose internal injuries had finally caught up to him. They worked on him for 18 minutes. Real monitoring, real interventions, real equipment doing what it was designed to do. When his heart rhythm stabilized and his blood pressure climbed back into safe ranges, the relief in the room was palpable. Lena stripped off her gloves and found Marcus watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What?" she asked. "You asked me earlier if I'd follow the SOP or trust my instincts. I've been thinking about that." He gestured at the ER around them, at the organized chaos of a hospital finding its rhythm again. The SOP said secure the biological samples at any cost. Your instinct said keep the patients alive. You chose instinct, and will spend months figuring out if it was right. But I'll tell you this. The 17-year-old with the rebar, Emma Chen, the guy we just coded, they're alive because someone was willing to make hard choices instead of hiding behind protocols. Lena felt something shift in her chest. Not absolution. She'd never fully have that for Boston, or for tonight. But maybe acceptance. The protocols exist for a reason, Marcus. They're supposed to be the condensed wisdom of everyone who came before us. And sometimes wisdom means knowing when to break the rules. He held out his hand. Partners? She shook it. Partners. The debrief at 0900 was exactly as brutal as expected. Hospital administrators, FBI agents, CDC investigators, and a lawyer who looked like she charged by the syllable all took turns dissecting every decision made between 22:30 hours and dawn. Lena walked them through her choice in the loading dock, explaining the calculus of lives versus samples, of certainty versus chaos. "Dr. Kovac," the FBI agent said, his tone professionally skeptical, "are you aware that aiding the escape of a suspect in a federal investigation is a criminal offense? I'm aware that I'm a physician who was presented with a threat to patient safety and made a decision to neutralize that threat with minimal casualties." Lena kept her voice steady. "Whether that decision was legally defensible is for you to determine. Whether it was medically necessary, I can defend absolutely. The investigation would take months. The consequences would ripple through careers and policies and probably congressional hearings." But when Lena finally walked out of that conference room at 1300 hours, having been awake for 31 straight hours, she felt lighter somehow. Marcus caught up to her in the parking garage. "They're putting me on administrative leave pending the investigation. You too, probably." "Yeah." Lena leaned against her car, the metal cold through her coat. "You know what's funny? 3 months ago, everyone laughed when I pulled out the SOP binder. Tonight, we survived because someone actually read the protocols and knew what to do when everything failed. That someone being you?" Marcus's smile was tired but genuine. "When this is over, when the investigations wrap up and the media moves on and we're allowed to practice medicine again, Mount Sinai is going to need physicians who can think under pressure, the kind who check the protocols and then know when to improvise. I'm going to make sure they remember that." 6 weeks later, ProPublica published a follow-up investigation that definitively proved Blackwell Medical Solutions had been funneling defense contractor money into unauthorized bioweapons research at 17 institutions nationwide. The samples Reeves had taken were confirmed to be in CDC custody, handed over by Elena Martinez as part of her journalistic integrity protocols. No weapons were developed, no attacks occurred, and the defense contractor's leadership faced federal charges. Angela Reeves was never found. The FBI suspected witness protection, foreign intelligence extraction, or possibly just excellent tradecraft by someone who'd planned her disappearance as carefully as she'd planned the hospital siege. Lena returned to work at Mount Sinai Memorial on a cold January morning, walking through an ER that had been renovated and upgraded and equipped with redundant backup systems that made the old generators look like museum pieces. Rita was at the nurse's station, Marcus was reviewing charts, and on the wall behind the main desk, someone had framed the old SOP binder under glass with a plaque that read, "In memory of the night we learned that protocols and people both matter." Emma Chen sent cards every month, crayon drawings of doctors and patients and sunshine. Christopher Huang's mother filed a lawsuit that was settled quietly, and Lena attended his memorial service because some debts couldn't be paid, but had to be acknowledged. If you've ever had to choose between the rules and what's right, drop a comment. I want to know I'm not alone in that struggle. And if this story hit you the way I hope it did, if you felt the weight of those decisions and the darkness of that night, hit like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to remember that courage isn't about never being afraid. It's about making the hardest call when everything's on the line and trusting that you did your best with what you had. Stay strong out there.